Welcome to the Thriving Misfits podcast, where we celebrate the stories and insights of those who break the mold and thrive outside the conventional. I'm your host, Fiona Young, and today we have an incredibly inspiring guest joining us. Our guest today is Lyn Lee, a collaborative and forward-thinking professional recognized for her unique perspectives and with a rich background that spans both governments and private sectors. Lyn leads the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Imperative for a FTSE 100 company right now. This unique expertise really positions her as a seasoned professional adept at navigating complex cultural landscapes. As a change maker and advocate for inclusion, Lyn provides a distinct human perspective to shape and implement policies. So join us as we delve into Lyn's journey, exploring her insights on creating a more inclusive world and the powerful impact of storytelling. This is an episode you really don't want to miss out on. So Lyn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Fiona. Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Great. And Lyn, you and we have known each other for so many years already. The first encounter was in Shell, where you're one of my mentors, and I really look up to you. You have been such an inspiration to me during Shell and even helping me to take that leap. And still now, 7 years after I've left the company, we're still in touch. I love what you're doing. And thank you so much for your continued support.
Not a problem. And I think in the same way that you say that I've inspired you, you have been an inspiration. You are a model mentee. I remember all the times when we had our discussions and you would come all prepared with all the questions and you would have your checklist in terms of the things that we need to do. And I actually really learned a lot from you. And I think what I really like about that mentee-mentor relationship was that it was collaborative. So in the same way that you're learning from me, I learned from you as well. Yeah, so I think we all had the curiosity hat on. So thank you for that too.
Absolutely. Now, the audience would love to get to know you a little bit better, Lyn. So let's kick it off with some rapid fire round questions. So the first question is, what's the funniest cultural misunderstanding that you've experienced, especially because you're traveling so often? So what is something that you could share with us?
Wow, that's a difficult one. I'm not known to be a funny person, but okay. There is one. I love to eat. So I think the one thing that came to mind immediately was a work dinner in the Netherlands. So I had opened the menu and there was like fish that I liked, but there was also the beef that I liked. Yeah, so I looked across to my colleague who's a German and I said, hey, why don't you order the beef and I order the fish and then we can share. And he looked so horrified. It was literally a very horrified look. And he said, I do not share my food. And I think that was really that moment. That was a real diversity moment where I thought, okay, not everyone is an Asian, right? So coming from where I am, from Singapore, being an Asian, sharing food is also caring. Yeah, and I think for other cultures, this may be a little bit not so acceptable to share your food. So I think that would be one of the things I would always remember about cultural differences.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is so common for us to order multiple dishes and just share, and then we can try different types instead of just doing your own. All right.
Diversity of food, right?
Exactly. Now, you are in the midst of publishing your first book, your debut book, and I can't wait to read it. And you have always been such a strong supporter also for me to publish my book, How to Thrive as a Misfit. Now, what's the most outrageous or maybe a funny title that you came up with for your book before settling on the final one?
Yeah, well, you are an author yourself, so you know how mind-bending it is to look for a title that you think would resonate with yourself and also with the readers. So I had this long list of titles, and I was checking with people. So I think there were about 10 to 15 titles. And there was one day I got quite frustrated because they all felt like it was there, but not really there. And I thought, so what? Yeah, so I thought, okay, that could be a title. So what? So for me, that was funny because I went around and said, okay, I've got it. Yeah, the title is called So What? And my daughter says, so what about so what, right? Like, why do you have this title? Yeah, so I think amusing for me because it was at a point in time where I was frustrated to go like, what the heck, whatever title would do. But jokes aside, I had considered the title So What because many times in the work that I do in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I get asked that question. So what, right? How does it matter? Why is it important? So anyway, so that was the probably the most amusing title for me. In the end, I didn't choose that title, thankfully.
But it is definitely catchy. And that's the first thing that a reader will see, right? In a bookstore, they will see your title and it needs to be in a way catchy for marketing purposes, right?
Right. So who knows? Second is So What?
Oh, yeah. You're going to keep on writing. Do you enjoy the journey of writing?
Yeah, labor of love. Right now, more labor than love, but I'm sure I'm going to see the love very soon. Yeah, so I think, it's therapeutic. It's therapeutic.
Can't wait to see it getting published and, up on Amazon, in the local bookstores. So definitely you have to tell us when it's going to be published. Yeah?
Definitely.
All right. So now let's look a little bit back into your childhood. So when you look back in your childhood, were there any moments or maybe some experiences that stand out to you in terms of shaping your perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. I was really shaped by my parents. So I grew up on a farm, believe it or not, in Singapore, I grew up on a farm. And it was a commercial farm with farm hands. And I always noticed that there were a few of them who really didn't say much. But anyway, I mean, I look back now and I suspect that a couple of them were actually on the autism spectrum. And I saw how my mom actually took care of the farm hands. And one of them actually never spoke. He was always on time, did his work, and then he'll go into hiding. And I think those were some of the early memories around how my mom and dad looked out for people, the farm hands that we had, took care of them and also their families, and made sure that they actually had a safe, psychologically safe space to work and to be themselves. Yeah, and that has always been my inspiration.
Wow, that's amazing to already witness that as a child, right? And being in that environment to be able to embrace all these differences, because neurodivergence is such an important aspect that we need to embrace in the workplace. I know that in DEI, we typically would kick it off with the gender equity conversation and then mix in a little bit around LGBTQ plus, maybe generations. But neurodivergence is a really hot topic now, right? Because this is something that is not necessarily visible. Is there anything in that space that you can share a little bit more about in terms of neurodivergence in the workplace?
Right. Well, I think this is a huge space, as you say, and it's a complex space because it is not always visible, as you're aware. And, the interesting thing about neurodiversity is that, this whole spectrum at some point in time will all be impacted because you don't have to be born with neurodiversity, right? You could acquire it. So, for example, people who are, in the aging population may find themselves with neurological challenges, dementia, etc. So I think it's something to be quite aware of in terms of the impact to ourselves, impact to people around us, and what is it that we can do to create a more inclusive society. So to be more thoughtful around the small things, and I really mean small, in terms of, restaurants, workplaces, and things like noise and light, all these things that we take for granted. If you are neurotypical, and many times also, if we provide for support around neurodivergence, you'll find that actually all of us benefit. Yeah, so things around noise levels, around lighting, as I said, accessibility, around, things that will be made more convenient for someone to be, entering space, etc. So I would say that this is actually a growing area, important area, and it impacts all of us.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's not something necessarily that you're born with, but it could also develop along your journey, along your life. And I know it may sound funny, but as a new mother, we always encounter the foggy mommy brains afterwards, right? After giving birth. So this is also something that is not necessarily visible to someone, but also I think a really great opportunity to be mindful of that. New mommies may come into the office with a little bit of a foggy brain.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you can't see it, right? And a lot of times people do not want to admit if they, feel like they are not able to participate in, something small around the workplace. Yeah. Because, in cases like this, you feel different. And you feel like perhaps everyone else doesn't have the issue, so you don't talk about this. Yeah, so I think actually is an area in which we all should be more perceptive about, like you say, right? So you're a new mother, you have gone through foggy brain, so you probably be looking out for other mothers, right? Expectant mothers, and think that okay, maybe there's something that I can do for them or reach out to ask if they're okay. Yeah, and these are simple things.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes the simple things are not always so easy to implement because people may not even think about them, right? But they're definitely very simple. Now, you are a forward-thinking leader in the space of DEI. I've seen you on LinkedIn where you're speaking at events. You're such a thought leader. What is the most out-of-the-box strategy you've implemented, whether it's right now at Shell or maybe supporting other organizations? So what is one out-of-the-box strategy that you've implemented to promote DEI in the workplace?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to call it out of the box. Yeah, but I think I got into the DE&I space. So I became the global head of DE&I about 6 years ago. And what I observed was that the debates was always very intellectual. It was always around the theories, always around what is the evidence on performance, if we're more diverse, etc. And I know that's important. But what was missing for me was the human experience. What was missing for me was people talking about the impact of, inclusive or non-inclusive environments. Yeah, and I think that was my inspiration also because of my background, how I grew up, who my role models were, things I observed. And I felt like the only way in which people would get this without being told or a gun held to their head was human experience. So I spoke and collaborated with my creative team in Shell and decided that we would do a series of human films. And it wasn't actors, but it was people who wanted to tell their story. And the stories don't always have a good ending. That's the other thing, right? We all want to have the happy ending. And sometimes the story is just in suspense, right? Around this is what's happened to me and this is what I live with. So it is a mixture of just human stories, people relating what it is that they're going through or have gone through. And two things. What I discovered was this: the creative team who were involved started to learn through the interviewing process and the filming process, and they grew in terms of their voice, the influence that they can have, in terms of how they help to tell the story. And I think the people who were telling the stories felt empowered, that they have a voice, that someone was listening. And it helped to spread the message because it became something where you can relate to another human being. And for that, we won a lot of awards. Yeah, and one of it would be the Cannes Festival Award.
Wow.
We had like 5 international awards, but I think that one really topped it for me. Yeah, I never expected when we decided to do films that would be the way to go. So, now our bar is really high, right? Every time I talk about wanting to have human experience films, they go like this. Yeah, and I go, that's great because I don't have to tell someone else that you have to set your bar really high because people now know because they've experienced it.
And were you able to also walk on the red carpet in Cannes?
Well, unfortunately, it was during COVID. So we got the award the final year before all the sanctions were lifted. Otherwise I would have been on the red carpet, unfortunately. But I have the award. I have the little trophy.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't believe it. He's such a celebrity.
Well, not me. I think the whole team. I mean, I literally was I think was the happy, benefit of all of the hard work that everyone else put in, right? I mean, I gave the idea, I had the inspiration, but I think that's also the story for me, right? Any out of the box thinking that a leader like myself has cannot be done just by myself. It has to be an inspiration for everyone else. And it has to be something which people can relate to and something that they can learn and grow from. And that was really my biggest learning from this. Yeah. Wow. To see how other people were growing and learning and having so much fun. I think in the end, that was important too. Like they had so much fun during a very dark period of COVID. Yes. It was the thing that pulled everyone together.
That's amazing. So next up is going to be the BAFTA or Oscars, Grammys. Okay.
Yes. Standing next to Michelle Yeoh, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. Another amazing lady. Yes. Now, you have been in this journey of being a leader in DEI. You've probably learned a lot of lessons as well. Is there anything that you have learned that was quite unexpected that also helped to shape your approach to leadership and advocacy in this place?
Well, I remember when I first got into this role, I was already with my script. As I walked into ERG meeting with the what we call the Enable group. So this is the ERG, the global ERG for people with disabilities, allies and people who do have those disabilities. So anyway, I was very open-minded. I thought, I was all ready to provide my solutions on some of the things which I thought needed to be better. Within 5 minutes, I felt totally incapable and incompetent and not confident to help. I got out of that meeting an hour later in tears. Yeah, and it was emotional tears because I felt like I couldn't help. Yeah, and I think that was one of those discoveries where it was unexpected, but very, very poignant in terms of the way that I approach the work that I do. And that is, I don't have all the answers. Yeah, and I never will have all the answers. But I think what's important is to be genuinely empathetic, to listen, and to really be curious. Yeah, I spoke about curiosity from the start. Is to really be curious without judgment in terms of what people are going through, and to work through the solutions together. Yeah, I mean, that piece of paper with all my solutions, I don't know. I think I threw that away, as well. Yeah, I mean, some of them were useful, but I think, a one-dimensional thinking, my own solution is never going to work, right? Because again, in this space, it's around including others. It's around the effort about, everyone moving forward together. So I think that was one of my really unexpected learning much earlier on in this work.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think I really always have appreciated your openness and also how you embrace vulnerability and sharing all of these things, because even leaders may have a moment of where it's just not going to pan out the way that you've expected, right? And you learn from it. And as a leader, it's always about continuous learning as well. Now, right. A lot of our audience, they tune in because they feel like a misfit. Many of us have experienced moments of feeling like a misfit. So can you share a memorable story from your youth or from your childhood that reflects your misfit identity? And also, how did it influence your journey?
Yeah. Well, Fiona, you would know, but I think the listeners and the viewers wouldn't know. I'm quite tall for an Asian lady. So I've had to live with this unfortunate gene defect. Let's call it that way. And that's why I feel like I'm a misfit. I mean, I grew up in that era where being tall as a girl wasn't something you should be proud of. Yeah, so I remember always feeling like my head was above everyone else. Yeah, so I think what I started to do as well was to really try to hide myself, right? To try to be as small as possible. Didn't go very far because when I got to secondary school, so when I was like 14, I used to be teased about my height. And every time we went out somewhere, right, gathering or we were going out as a group, my friends used to joke that if you lose your way, it's very simple, right? Do not worry, just look for Lyn's head. Yeah, and it was funny for them, it was horrible for me. Yeah, because, every time I hear something like this, I really felt like I just have to shrink smaller and I just have to be as invisible as possible. Yeah, and it took me in my adulthood to really shed some of these things around being invisible, not having a voice, to be as small as possible so I'm not noticeable, right? So that if you get lost, don't look for Lyn's head, that type of thing. Yeah, so I think that has shaped, I don't think about this consciously, but I think those were some of the childhood memories that I remember about being a total misfit just because of my height, yeah, and trying so hard to not be tall, something which I can't help, of course.
You cannot. How did you learn to embrace it, and how does it show up now in your professional life?
Yeah, I think it was a really conscious journey. I speak very often about, well-being and self-discovery, from physical, emotional to, spiritual. And it's spiritual, not religious, yeah. And I think it was that journey. But I think one of the things that really had an impact for me, I didn't think about it at that point in time, but I started getting interested in the outdoors, trekking, high altitude in mountains. And I started that journey because I got curious. I wanted to do something that was totally out of my scope, something that I never done before, and something I could do on my own as a challenge. And as I did that, I felt like, wow, being tall helped because I had longer legs. I could cover more ground. And also then it means that I'm not so different, in terms of strides from male counterparts. But I think being alone, especially when I trek on my own, not with friends, right, or with strangers, it built my confidence. And it showed to me that actually, if you're focused on what you're good at or what you're interested in, people don't take notice of things that perhaps you're so conscious about. Yeah, so, things like my height never really featured in terms of whether anyone cared about that. Yeah, but it's very interesting because, fast forward, it has helped me think about what it feels like to be a misfit. And what it means to actually be that voice for other people who feel like they don't belong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And maybe next time you can also climb Kilimanjaro. That was like one of my most, amazing experiences in my life.
Yes, I remember you going for that, right? So that's a little bit life-changing, isn't it? That once
Absolutely.
you get Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I would even count it into my top 3 life-changing moments in my life, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I guess also working in a Dutch company, you will also see a lot of tall male colleagues. You're going to look them eye to eye, right?
I was going to say that. Yeah. So I think what's really nice now is I remember the first time I went to The Hague, and I had a tall Dutch male colleague, come to me and said, "Wow, you're tall." And it was so funny. It was so funny to me to have a tall person tell me I'm tall, for a lady. And I thought, wow, okay. I mean, this is great. I mean, now I'm laughing at it. I'm not trying to be as small as possible. And I think that's progress for me. But you're exactly right. I was thinking about that. Seeing them eye to eye, But you're not going to lie to me.
Exactly. Absolutely. And thank you so much, Lyn, for all your sharing, because that brings us to the end of another inspiring episode of the Thriving Misfits podcast. Huge thank you, Lyn, for sharing your incredible journey and also insights with us today. Your commitment to inclusion and also your powerful storytelling really highlights the importance of creating spaces where diverse voices are not only heard, but also celebrated. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, review, and leave us a review basically on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. So thank you for tuning in. We hope you feel as inspired as I do to take actions towards creating a more inclusive and empowered world. Until the next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep on thriving.